Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's video is about the insurrection going around America. Let's see why people are protesting all over the state. And the other word on the street, people are saying since the armored car is already on the street of America, is it still necessary for the armored cars to be in DC on June 14th for the president's birthday? And also, people are wondering why they have an armored car when insurrection is going on around the country. So let's dive into these videos together, and we're going to do talking at the end of this video. Let's watch.
Tests against the administration's immigration crackdown spreading across the country. At the warnings of additional military deployments in American cities, with pockets of unrest persisting in Los Angeles, ICE preparing to deploy tactical units to major U.S. cities, and protests against the administration's immigration crackdown spreading across the country. At the White House.
Now the press secretary Caroline doubled down on the president's harsh action. Let's hear what she has to say.
The mob violence is being stomped out. The criminals responsible will be swiftly brought to justice. And the Trump administration's operations to arrest illegal aliens are continuing unabated. The position of the Democrat Party is that the federal government is not allowed to enforce our laws and to arrest and deport illegal alien criminals. They're attempting to use a violent mob as a weapon against their own constituents to prevent the enforcement of immigration law. This is deeply un-American and morally reprehensible.
Now President Trump said he will send thousands of soldiers to LA and vowed to liberate LA from what he called invasion. Let's listen to the president.
Under the Trump administration, this anarchy will not stand. We will not allow federal agents to be attacked, and we will not allow an American city to be invaded and conquered by a foreign enemy. I'll say it loudly and clearly. They better do something before it's too late. Very simply, we will liberate Los Angeles and make it free, clean, and safe again.
A curfew from the mayor, Karen Bass, remained effective for 2 nights for some part of downtown LA. Let's listen.
Bass will remain in effect for a second night tonight for portions of downtown. The LAPD says it made nearly 200 arrests yesterday, more than the total arrests made on the previous 3 days, in what the police chief is calling a concerning escalation in unlawful and dangerous behavior. In a nighttime address, California Governor Newsom blamed the president for the continued arrest in LA. He also issued a warning to other states. Let's hear what he has to say.
California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived. He's taking a wrecking ball to our founding fathers' historic project. 3 co-equal branches of independent government. There are no longer any checks and balances. The founding fathers, they didn't live and die to see this kind of moment. It's time for all of us to stand up.
In summary, the governor says LA may be the first, but it is obvious it's not going to be ending in his state. Other state is next, and it is exactly what is happening now. Protests across America. Democracy is under assault. There is no longer check and balances. Let's continue watching.
In New York, meanwhile, the NYPD says it made dozens of arrests at an anti-ICE protest in Lower Manhattan. In Denver, police say they've made 17 arrests outside the state capitol. Governor Greg Abbott says that he's deploying the Texas National Guard to locations across the state ahead of protests planned in San Antonio.
You just hear from the horse's mouth. The Texas governor said that he's going to deploy National Guard over the protesters ahead of time in San Antonio, and also preparing to deploy a special response team to 5 cities and regions won by the Democrats. Let's listen.
Reporting that ICE is preparing to deploy its special response teams to 5 cities and regions run by Democrats: Seattle, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and the Washington, D.C. area.
Under 200 to 300 people, that's my estimate, is still several. The number of police that I've heard from some law enforcement commanders on the ground is over 1,000. So we're still talking about a number of protesters that is dwarfed by the amount of police.
The question here is, who are the special response team? Let's hear from Julia.
Think of that as like a SWAT team for ICE. Those are people who could go out with long guns, Bearcats, tracked and armored vehicles. They're trained for situations where they might be making a mass number of arrests, like workplace enforcement, or in cases where they think they might encounter a threat. They were used in the raid on Diddy's home last year. If you remember the footage of that, quite striking when you saw really the SWAT team go in. They're not typically used in cases where you might be making arrest of non-criminal, non-threatening migrants in communities like Los Angeles. In fact, usually federal law enforcement tries not to use that escalated tactic unless they are prepared for their response. And of course, it was those military tactics that prompted some of the protesters staying in Los Angeles starting last week. And so now they're prepared to use those in 5 cities across the United States as yesterday. But we know that at least in those cities, which we have to point out are sanctuary cities run by Democratic leaders, those are the areas where they are preparing to deploy those types of resources.
The question now is, where is the country keeping a close eye on? Let's hear what Peter Alexandra got to say.
Typically, what we're going to be keeping a close eye on is whether the president is willing to go further and invoke the Insurrection Act here, which would allow, the first time as we've been covering in 50 years, 5 decades, at least, that the U.S. government, the president, has federalized American troops in a state against the wishes or without a request from that state's governor, in this case, Gavin Newsom. We should note we heard from Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, a bit earlier today. There was one particularly fiery exchange where she made the argument that a majority of the arrests, the majority of the protesters there have been engaged in violent activity. Notably, she said nearly 400 people have been arrested who were undocumented immigrants in this country. We heard, though, from a reporter in the room reminding her that there have been thousands of people participating here. So it's not entirely clear. So it is clear, I think we should say, that the president has been amplifying the size and scope of this when we know, in fact, it's isolated to a small area. But certainly this is a place that he feels like he has the political advantage, and one where White House aides and other allies of the president have communicated that he is more than willing to lean. Heard from Tom Homan, the so-called border czar, who has said in recent interviews that that the White House right now, the administration is, in his words, opening up the aperture. You'll remember early on throughout the campaign, the president said the focus would be on violent criminals, the worst of the worst. But already we're seeing some pictures from around the country where they are clearly opening up that aperture, in Homan's words, echoing the words of Stephen Miller, one of the president's top aides here, where they're trying to bring up their numbers to as many as 3,000 arrests and deportations each day. That's well ahead of the numbers they've been seeing early on. And it does speak to one of the unique challenges they're facing right now and what is entering into the United States illegally.
Based at 29 Palms in California were moved in or mobilized to closer into the LA area earlier this week. But since then, they haven't actually been on the ground as part of this Task Force 51. In fact, they're still back again in the LA area, but not forward and actually deployed. And they're undergoing some very basic training to get ready for this mission. That includes things like learning about the standard rules of force. I've heard the term rules of engagement. That's what the military talks about when they're overseas. When they're here domestically, they refer to them as rules of force. It's the left and right limits about what these Marines will be allowed to do while they are under Task Force 51, if in fact they do end up on the streets of LA. So far, what we know, they will be tasked with protecting federal buildings and personnel. They always have the inherent right of self. To a couple of sources familiar, we are also told that the Marines could be used to protect ICE personnel while they are on raids. That could include even driving some of those ICE agents to these immigration fighters. We hear the word out of even Secretary of Defense every single time we hear from him. The concern here is not that they can't handle the situation. The concern is that they are trained in a very different way than someone like the Los Angeles Police Department or DHS would be to handle situations like this. It's everything from just the language that they use while they are on a mission. Those are the kinds of things that they are trying to iron out before they put these Marines on the street. The real concern in here is some very simple misunderstanding that's based on nothing more than a difference in the training could lead to a situation that puts Marines in a dangerous situation.
Now let's move on to the Secretary of Defense. Let's hear what Courtney Cobbs had to say about him. Let's go.
Was really struck by his acknowledgement that this could expand out from just LA to other places in the country. He didn't talk a whole lot more about the overall price tag. We learned yesterday it was $134 million for these first 60 days. We don't know how much longer, frankly, it could go, but he was defiant when discussing this issue, saying that, in fact, the president has the authority to do this. He was pressed by Senator Baldwin, though, and I was really struck by the exchange because she asked him, look, we know what authority the president is bringing in the California National Guard. It's under his Title 10 authority. Why are the Marines there? Under what authority? He couldn't answer that. He said he would get back to her with an answer later.
Hear what Courtney has to say about the DC military parade this Saturday, June 14th, 2025, U.S. 250th anniversary and President Trump's 79th birthday included in the parade. Hear what people are asking. Since the armored car is already on the LA street, is it still necessary for the armored tank to be on the DC street? Let's hear her thoughts.
Now, Army officials and specifically Army engineers are pretty confident that the damage to D.C. streets, you see some heavy vehicles here, including tanks that are expected to be out on the streets of D.C. for this parade on Saturday. They're confident that the measures they are taking to mitigate any damage are going to be effective. It's simple things like putting down steel plates. They're redoing some of the treads. You can see on the tanks there, they're putting a new rubber tread on them. The hope is that those kinds of things will stop some damage to D.C. streets or at least mitigate that. Right now, there is an estimate for up to $16 million that this could cost D.C. in damage.
As we move forward towards the June 14th parade showdown, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Thanks for watching.